So this is all about color and fabric because that is my favorite topic. All right. And we're going to get into what does hashtag no more quilt clones mean? Welcome to, oops, it went past. There we go. Welcome to all of you. I'm so excited that you're here. This is going to be fun, I hope. So who am I? Just a little bit. I've been quilting for over 20 years. I've taught classes on color and how to choose fabrics and all of that. And that is, as I've already said, my favorite part of quilting is choosing fabrics and especially putting together colors and fabric characteristics and polka dots and things like that. My most recent quilt was accepted. I had never entered a national contest before, and so I was so excited it got into the Daytona Beach contest, and it happened the last week in February. So all of the other quilt weeks have been canceled since then through AQS, but that one got in, so I was very, very excited to do that and was able to go to talk to people about, to look at my quilt hanging there, but also to talk to people about my book with a grant from the New Hampshire State Council on the Arts. I am a juried member of the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen and have been for, I don't know, 15 years, something like that. And so I put one piece into their big quilt fair that they do every summer up at Sunapee, Lake Sunapee here in New Hampshire. And they get 20 to 30,000 visitors every year. They just this week decided that they will not be able to host it this year, along with so many of our other events that have been canceled in the quilt world and in the whole world here. But so I gonna have to set my own deadline so I actually get a piece done this summer. But I was able to get a great small grant through them to go to Quilt Market last year. And it was actually the Quilt Market, so it wasn't the International Quilt Festival, it was Quilt Market the weekend before in Houston, which is where all the quilt shop owners from around the country go to their trade show, basically, so that's where they can order fabric and books and everything, and notions, everything else that their shops need. And they held a conference on building a business in the quilting industry. So I got to meet all kinds of cool people and talk to them about doing what I'm doing now. My book published at the end of December last year, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm married with 4 grown children. My daughter Morgan is on this call in case I think it's moral support more than anything. And we live in Hanover, New Hampshire. And our big news this week is that we have hummingbirds that have come back and several different varieties. And yesterday we saw a Baltimore Oriole, and he's come back today. And they're so cool. See this color, the yellow across the bottom of the screen? That's actually the color on his feathers along with black. He's beautiful. So that's been our exciting news in New Hampshire. These are a few of my quilts, just to give you a little bit of an idea of the kind of work I do. Everything from the left one is Hope Springs Eternal. And it's hard to tell probably because the screen might be tiny, but there's some thread painting in there for the leaves on the trees. And it's actually much smaller than these other 2 quilts. They're a larger size, but it's a framed quilt that's about this big. The one in the middle is called In the Beginning, God Created the Heavens. And I will talk about that one a little bit later in the presentation. But I had seen a PBS special that was actually a couple years old, but on the Hubble telescope and the amazing photographs of outer space. And so I wanted to have a little reflection on that. And then the one on the right is very old. And it still hangs in my kitchen and has been there for many years and is bright and cheery as it was from the beginning. And you'll see it's part of a, I use, part of it is a, from my pattern that I offer on my website. Oh, wrong direction, sorry. So no more quilt clones. I was at the Daytona Beach conference, the quilt show, and talking to a woman who does long arm quilting. And I was telling her about my book, you know, because that's what I was there to do. And I bought a piece of bamboo batting from her, so I can't wait to use it. And we were talking about how she's from Florida, and she often gets, you know, a whole class of people who've taken a class that uses the kit for the class, or, you know, you choose between two of them or whatever from your quilt shop. And she said, you know, all these women walk in the door and I'll have 20 quilts that are exactly the same that I have to quilt. And she's like, I've never been so bored. And I feel bad for her. I felt bad for her. But we talked about there's got to be a way for people to start being able to figure out how to not make a quilt that is just like everyone else's, but that has enough of a difference that it's really belongs to them and reflects their personality. So this is a picture from the video that I've put up, minute long video on No More Quilt Clones. So if you haven't watched that already, you're welcome to do that. It's on YouTube. But you can make a quilt your own, whether you use a kit or pre-cuts. I mean, you can switch out a fabric or two. You can, even with a fabric collection, you know, you can use someone's collection, but maybe not use all of it. Use a couple of pieces and then add in fabrics from your stash or from the quilt shop. And then there's choosing your own. So which is what I hope everybody gets to. But there's a lot of steps along the way that you can work on to get to do some practice on choosing fabrics. So that's what hashtag No More Quilt Clones is all about. So three of the ways that you can start to make your quilt your own is color, and this is the color wheel that I have instructions for in my book, and value, and you can see the quilt down the bottom. It's one I made for my other daughter, and it took me like, I don't know, 6-8 years or something. It was supposed to be for one graduation, and it happened like 3 graduations later or something. And I didn't even finish all the blocks. I had to rearrange them because I got bored. But you can see that that value makes the quilt work, the lighter, brighter fabrics against the dark background. And then the fabric characteristics, the polka dots and the stripes and all those cool, fun things to try. This is a page from my book on color and color relationships. And the thing about color is that if you learn a little bit, all of a sudden, you know, you can try new things. And whether you focus on monochromatic or analogous colors and complementary colors and think about it in that way, whether you use, you know, a color wheel to help you, whether you look at colors next to each other, there are all kinds of ways to start thinking about color. But if you have a kit pattern or a pattern with a kit, all you have to do is think about switching out a fabric that looks almost exactly like the fabric that's in there. You know, if you have a pattern that has a lot of darks in it, maybe you have another dark brown that would really be basically the same thing, but it's your choice, and you can switch it out and all of a sudden it looks similar because it is the same color and the same feel of fabric, but now it's become yours. And so that's one way to think about at least starting to make your quilt your own, is using color in that way. And I'm way into color, as you can see. This quilt is one of my oldest quilts, and it is the one that my pattern, my mirrored reflections pattern that's on my website is all about. And using a color wheel can just give you some aid, some direction, you know, as you're, and this is probably a little the next step or two from just switching out a fabric that's almost exactly the same. But it's a very, I think this is a very good tool to use, because it gives you a picture of how colors progress, you know, and bless you, and how colors match up next to each other, and what they look like when they're next to each other, and when they're like across the wheel from each other, and what their relationships are. So value is the next step. And value would be switching out something like, if you have a pattern that has a light background, maybe a white or a cream background, and switch to another cream, or maybe try a very soft yellow or a soft gray, and just see what that does with the fabrics that you've got. And you know, you need to make sure that if you're looking at fabrics that have the blue tones or the red tones, that yellow tones, that you know, that you're choosing a background, a matching light to fill that in, that's in the same color family, in the same section on the color wheel, because even cream has a variety of tones to it. And you can do the same thing with a dark or a medium. If you know, especially looking at like borders on a quilt, switching out your borders or switching out the sashing, or you know, a pattern will call for light, medium, and darks, and tell you how much of each to purchase, so that if you've got, if you're working with it that way, that's a really good way to know how much of each you need. But also, you can choose whether it's a severe contrast, you know, a really extreme contrast, or whether it's a gentle, soft contrast. And like back on this quilt, in the middle, it's a very, very gentle contrast. But when you get out to the edges here, you can see that it's a much stronger difference in value. And when you switch out a darker fabric, it's going to have a lot more punch. So you do need to make sure that, you know, you've looked at it, your new dark fabric, you take a look at it with all of the other fabrics that you've got there, just to make sure that not only the color, but the value is the right choice with your fabrics. Now, this is fun. Fabric characteristics. This is where it gets a little more complicated, but you can make so many cool choices. It's great. This quilt has it's called a British strippy quilt, and they would just make stripes, basically, and whether they had solid fabrics, you know, one whole piece of fabric, or whether they had to piece the fabrics together. And I wanted to do something similar. And so I was looking for a paisley, and you can see in this next slide here that the paisley is actually a Tula pink fabric with snails on it. But it comes across as, you know, a kind of a muted, actually, I don't know if you can see, but it's under here. And you can see that it has very soft middles, but there's enough movement going on that it keeps drawing your eye in. And this background for the pieced part is a batik that's a purpley gray green color, a whole bunch of different colors in there, and it has some pattern to it. Oh, wrong one, sorry. But when you step back from it, it becomes almost like just a mottled gray because of the colors that are chosen to go with it. So you can do a lot with choice of print. And these are the parts of fabric characteristics that are good to think about as you're choosing fabrics. And you know, I think this is a little bit more on the not advanced side, but I think if you're working with a kit, you're not just going to come in and flip a scale pattern, you know, put in a large scale for a tiny scale piece of fabric. But if you're working with someone's fabric collection, you know, then adding in something that's more intense or has polka dots instead of more mottled fabric or something can work. But I think that fabric characteristics are things that level of your choice really could be your inspiration fabric, but it can also really lend itself towards choosing more fabrics than just switching out a fabric. And we're going to take a look at a couple examples here. So printer pattern is like the snails, what's on your piece of fabric. Scale is the whether it's a large print or a small print. Distribution would be, well, here I'm going to show you an example first. It's a lot easier to show that one than to talk about it. Temperature is how hot the colors are or how cold the colors are. And, you know, on the color wheel, you can, the blues end of thing are the cool colors, and the yellows end of the side of the color wheel are the hot colors. And intensity, well, if you look, say this example here, if you're looking at the blue-gray background, that's a less intense than these orangey pink colors and the lime color. So here are a couple examples of using fabric characteristics. This one on the bottom is very much distribution and scale, trying to show the depth of stars, you know, out of fabric, right? So the print on the bottom, the polka dots on the bottom are more defined polka dots, and they're spaced further apart. Whereas these this piece along the side and that's up here, they're softer and they're not as intense, and they're closer together. They're a little more dense, so they look further away than the ones that are brighter. The one at the top here, this one is called Autumn Heat, and because it's hot, it has you know, a lot of hot colors in there, hot pink and bright yellow, and that's where its name came from. So those are very intense colors, and there's a lot of polka dots in this one and stripes. I like that part. And this one on the right, this is Genesis, the one that was in the quilt show, and this one shows value and scale and intensity. I think that we're going to see, I think, in one of the questions that somebody had in a minute, that value and scale can really make a difference in a quilt. That this, now I hope you're seeing my mouse as it's moving around here. This black and white fabric is there's more white, but still quite a bit of black. So it's It's not quite a medium because there's enough white, right? But when you come out here, this piece is still black and white, but because there's more black, it's definitely a heavier, it's a darker value. So it's it would be the dark. And then this one is sort of in between. There's more white space, but those black dots are pretty heavy. So you know, you've got to think about how to use the value to do what you want the quilt to do. And you know, you can see the distribution here, like the dots and the little flowers in this white has a very random distribution, and they're much further apart than in this black and white polka dot here. It's still random because they're not in lines like a Swiss dot, but they're closer together. So it just gives a different depth to it, just like the other polka dots. So you can go all in and choose all your fabrics. That's the goal. At least that's my goal, is to help people to be able to do that. Not everybody wants to do that, and that is fine. But that's what I'm here to do. This is the start of my next project. We'll see what happens, because I've already chosen a bunch of other fabrics, but this was, you know, when I took the picture a week ago. All right, and this is my book. It's called Conquering Color and Fabric. It takes you through just very gently through the few steps to take and things to learn. And there's a chapter on how to put it all together. And I think that there's a connection between No More Quilt Clones and learning how to put color and fabric together. Hopefully the rest of the world can can see that too.